It's the 1247th day of the war. The negotiations between Ukraine and Russia in Istanbul lasted only 38 minutes and ended with almost nothing, except the agreement on the exchange of civil figures and a pair of obnoxious lectures on the history of Medinsky, which in the West did not want to see at the negotiating table anymore. The main thing is that Russia once again demonstrated that it does not want neither ceasefire nor a meeting between Putin and Zelensky, i.e. the steps that Trump and European partners expect. Europe managed to replace the U.S. military financial aid to Ukraine, says Financial Times, a package released again in 2025. On average, the amount is the same as in the previous 3 years, but almost without the participation of the United States. Meanwhile, the Trump administration, it seems, for the first time provided new military aid to Ukraine. This is about the repair and maintenance of the BMP Bradley delivered to Biden. Ukraine continues to beat the Russian railway logistics. This time, the train station in Novocherkassk was hit. Ukrainian Sintra explains that thus suffer Russian logistics routes over Donetsk and Lugansk. At the front, the Russians are trying to get through the Ukrainian defense under Pokrovsk and take a triangle at the junction of the Donetsk, Dnepropetrovsk, and Zaporizhzhia regions to create favorable conditions for the offensive in any of these regions. The offensive is given to the Russians with heavy losses, which is what the Zetniks themselves write. Russian problems with drones are not going anywhere. The Ministry of Defense buys Boplav Tridrag, and the pilots continue to direct the assault, especially since, according to the state, many Russian units are still not supposed to have their own drone operators. The ranks of the Russian army were replenished by another potential hero of the Soviet Union, the Magnitogorsk Beep, Alexander Yegorov, whose victims were 7 women. He was threatened to die before the age of 20, but the case was closed literally 2 days after being transferred to court, and Yegorov went to war. Meanwhile, residents of the occupied territories are already suffering from Yegorov's brothers. In Donetsk, the previously convicted Russian military Azad Sufyanov tried to beat a pensioner, which will be when they all return to their homeland. You can only guess. About this and much more in today's summary, which you can support with your like, comment, and subscription to the channel, especially for YouTube. Your subscriptions are important, so do not forget to click on this button, but you can support the channel financially on Patreon. The link to it is in the description and by buying NVPN, which is a means to bypass blockages that allow you to bypass blockages and use YouTube at a normal speed, Twitter, Instagram, unblock media in general. Everything you want, and the state should not decide where you can go, where you can't go. This should be decided only by you. VPNs are still legal, even after these amendments to the ban on the deliberate search for extremist information. Using VPNs is not prohibited. You can still buy them, you can still use them, so buy a VPN by the link in the description. Well, thank you very much to everyone who does this. You are invaluable. Support the channel. Well, we move on to what happened in the past 24 hours. The negotiations of the Russian-Ukrainian delegation in Istanbul lasted no more than 38 minutes. Statements of the leaders of the delegations demonstrated that Moscow and Kiev did not get closer neither on the issue of a possible ceasefire, nor on the issue of a possible meeting of presidents of two countries. Even the ultimatum from the country of Donald Trump, which promised Moscow severe sanctions in the event of a lack of progress by autumn, did not help. This is what the results of the negotiations on the version of the head of the Ukrainian delegation, Rustem Umerov, looked like. Ukraine offered to organize until the end of August a meeting of Presidents Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, with the participation of Donald Trump. Kiev indicated readiness to cease fire, including strikes on the critical and civilian infrastructure. Further stages of the exchange were also discussed by prisoners of war and held by countries on their territories by civilians. According to Umerov, the Russian delegation agreed to return the Ukrainians, who have been in captivity for more than 3 years, including the seriously injured and young. More than 1,200 people will take part in the exchange, said the head of the Ukrainian delegation. And this is how the version of the head of the Russian delegation, Vladimir Medinsky, sounds. Russia has proposed to form 3 working groups on political, humanitarian, and military issues for online work. The Ukrainian side agreed to consider the proposal. Moscow once again proposed to consider the possibility of announcing short interviews on the front line for 24-48 hours to gather the wounded and the killed. Let me remind you that earlier such interviews were in one-sided order, constantly violated and, first of all, by the Russians. They agreed to continue the exchange of prisoners in the form of 1,200 by 1,200, and proposed to give Ukraine a larger number if they find ours. The number will be greater, said Medinsky. Russia proposed to return to Ukraine another 3,000 bodies of the dead military in the armed forces of Ukraine. The issue of returning civilians was discussed. Medinsky accused Ukraine of the fact that Kursk refugees have not yet been returned to Russia from the Kharkov region. If you have brought them out of the fire, then return them home. If you have been kidnapped like Hamas, then call things by their names. In this case, we will be ready to exchange them for prisoners of war, said Medinsky. Is Russia going to return the illegally detained Ukrainian civilians? Medinsky did not clarify. Sanitary exchanges will be continued by the seriously injured and sick directly on the line of combat contact. The positions presented during the previous delegation meeting and the Turkish memorandums have been discussed for a long time. The positions are far enough. We have agreed to continue contacts both at the level of the delegation and, we hope, at the level of the working groups, said Medinsky. Medinsky expressed his proposal to Ukraine to hold a meeting with Zelensky and Putin only after the issue of the VGTRK film crew was discussed. In order for such a meeting to take place, it is necessary to work out the conditions for the agreement at this meeting. It is necessary not to discuss the conditions, but to leave a point, said Medinsky. The main result of the negotiations is once again the unwillingness of the Kremlin to stop the fire and hold a meeting at a higher level with these conditions, according to all Western partners of Ukraine. And now, once again, everyone, including Trump, has seen that only Russia is on the way to the end of the world. European countries have managed to replace the U.S. military financial aid to Ukraine. Financial Times reports with a reference to the data of the Kiev Institute of World Economics. As you can see in the infographic, in 2025, on average, Ukraine allocated as much military and other aid as it did in the previous 3 years, on average, in a month. However, if earlier a significant part of this amount was invested by the United States, then now the overwhelming majority of the costs lay on the shoulders of Europeans, which look like them. Did they manage to do it? The problem is that for a real change in the situation on the battlefield, at least military aid should increase, and it is not clear whether the European countries will be capable of this. Its positive role should be played by the fact that the NATO itself agreed to include military aid to Ukraine at the expense of military spending, which should exceed 5% of GDP, because the security of Ukraine is the security of Europe and the whole world. Meanwhile, Trump talked about the American aid to Ukraine and turned Trump on again. The U.S. president said that he was not sure about the purposeful use of all the aid that the Biden administration sent to Ukraine. Biden gave away either equipment or cash for $350 billion. The cash is even worse. I think not every dollar went to arms. Someday we want to find out the truth, said Trump. At the same time, he emphasized that the Ukrainians are bravely defending themselves and will be able to continue doing this. The entire NATO country is now massively buying American weapons. It is surprising, of course, that Trump, who has been making such a fuss about this topic, does not know that not every dollar went to arms. According to the same Kiev Institute, during the years of the war, the United States provided Ukraine with humanitarian aid for 3.5 billion euros and financial aid for 46.5 billion euros, which went to the filling of the Ukrainian budget. That is, for example, for the payment of pensions, salary to the budgetary, the restoration of the destroyed infrastructure, and so on. And this is not some kind of charity there. At war, the situation in the rear depends on the readiness of the population to endure the war and so on. Though cash is no less important than tanks and planes, and it is also important that there are independent anti-corruption bodies so that Western partners are sure that this cash does not settle in the pockets of officials and continue to transfer it. Despite Trump's rhetoric, signs of new military assistance are appearing. The U.S. Department of Defense has announced a contract for the repair of the BMP Bradley. Judging by the wording, this may be Trump's first military assistance contract in Ukraine during his second presidential term. The American company Biosystem Land and Armament LP received a $9 million contract for conducting technical examinations and conducting Bradley combat vehicles in full combat readiness. On the U.S. Defense website, it is said that the means will be scheduled for the Security Assistance Initiative in 2025. An analyst on the security and defense issues, Colby Bradwer, believes that this is a possible type of initiative for the security of Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. The amount of the contract is small, however. This may be the first military aid given to Ukraine by the administration of Donald Trump during his second presidential term. A week earlier, he stated that he was considering the possibility of renewing the aid to Ukraine. To be honest, I would not give this much importance. It has long been clear that Trump, practically on autopilot, continues, at least partially, Biden's policy while not supplying new weapons at least for free and not expanding the sanctions pressure. In fact, this became clear a few months ago when the U.S. extended some of the sanctions introduced by Biden. The BMP service handed over by the previous administration, the story of the same order. However, once again, we note that this is more than Trump's expectations after the election and at the beginning of the term. And that it is even more important that Bradley plays a very serious role on the front, showing himself as the best BMP of this war and becoming, in fact, irreplaceable in defense. Well, the main problem in defense, the main load in defense lies, of course, on the Ukrainian forces. And so we continue to support them and continue to assemble the Mavica for SBPAK 33 OHP. I remind you of the appeal from the Ukrainian soldiers, dear health. The soldiers of the Streltsy Battalion of the 33rd Separate Storm Regiment express their gratitude to Maidel Nacke for his work on the information front. We also refer to Maidel and the supporters of his channel asking to support the collection of MAVIC 3T, MAVIC Enterprise, and the antenna kit for our platoon in The solid airspace. Yes, maybe they don't have enough time and resources to make a beautiful kinematographic address for you, but their work every day to destroy. Russian fascist occupants and defend their homeland becomes less important. Therefore, it is very important to support them. We have already collected a little more than half of them, but nevertheless there is still a lot to collect. Therefore, here is a QR code for Monobank in the description of Monobank, private, USDT, TRC20, cryptocurrency and PayPal. Due to the fact that there is no way to donate to Monobank outside Ukraine, so use PayPal actively, use cryptocurrency actively. Unfortunately, it is not always possible to break through these banks so that they accept donations from abroad, so some collections are going slower. But thank you very much to everyone who participated. Thank you very much to everyone who will participate today. Let's help Ukrainian defenders buy the necessary equipment in order to continue to defend their country, their relatives, and their fellow citizens. Well, we are moving on. The Air Force of Ukraine received the first mobile systems in the country to conduct the pre-flight training of the F-16 fighters outside the airbase. The press service of the Foundation Turn Alive reports about this. At the request of the Ministry of Defense, the Charity Foundation acquired mobile systems for the service of new aircraft and aviation weapons. They create a full-fledged ecosystem that allows the service of aircraft both at the main and operational airfields. The first samples were transferred to the Air Command Center and will provide the functionality of F-16 fighters. Now the F-16 is serviced exclusively at airfields. The aircraft must be delivered to a specific point where it can be inspected, equipped with ammunition, and make sure it is in good condition. This complicates security issues and it becomes more and more difficult. To protect the aircraft from enemy missile attacks, new mobile systems will be able to get to where the aircraft landed, including in the event of an emergency landing. This will make it more effective to protect the aircraft, prepare them for combat missions faster, and use less people in the process of this preparation. Two systems are created to deploy Western fighters in field conditions. One provides for the technical service of the aircraft, the second, the preparation of the pilots and the work of ground personnel. The system of technical service contains everything necessary to prepare the aircraft for combat takeoff. Previously, 10 to 12 people were required for the suspension of one ammunition. The new ecosystem allows only 3 people to operate. At the same time, the process is twice as fast. The mission planning system includes a working module for pre-flight briefings and communication with the pilots, a living module for the rest of the operators during long journeys and movements. The main advantage of the system is mobility. When flying between airfields or on the site of an emergency landing, the team will be ready for a long journey. A long flight and fast flight preparation. I'm telling you this in great detail because this is a unique story and a step to the aviation of the future, which is not tied to a specially equipped airfield. This, in turn, is important because these airfields can become and regularly become targets for long-range high-precision strikes from drones and rockets. The Warzone building notes that such complexes are located in the South Pacific region in opposition to China and Europe in the event of a war against Russia, so Ukraine can share with partners not only the development of drones. Azerbaijani special services arrested 2 mercenaries of Russian man Wagner by accusing him of committing crimes abroad. Azerbaijani news bureau Aksoizi reports about this. The Sabil District Court of Baku has chosen a measure of pardon in the form of an arrest for 4 months. The citizens of Ramil Aliyev and Ismail Alexanov. In the framework of the criminal case against the state security of Azerbaijan, they are incriminating crimes both outside the country and on its territory. It is established that the detainees were selected by the armed formation in Wagner by Evgeny Prigozhin from the Russian justice colonies where they were punished for attempted murder and other serious crimes. They were released from further punishment, and for the agreed reward are involved in various military operations. The accused took part in combat actions on the territory of different countries with the use of firearms and explosives. In addition, they engaged in recruiting Azerbaijanis to participate in similar activities abroad. This is the first case when the post-Soviet country pursues its citizens for participation in the CHVK Wagner, and it is a continuation of the policy of the Azerbaijani government in relation to Russia, the military report notes. Earlier, employees of the Russian intelligence agency Sputnik Azerbaijan were detained in the country, who were accused of working for the FSB must be. This is the new reality where the country, which was recently considered almost an ally of Russia, is being arrested by the members of the war against Ukraine. While the Azerbaijanis who fought in the ranks of the defense forces feel calm and do not miss the opportunity to scratch their asses, this reality is created by Putin himself. Because his war against Ukraine, the longer it goes, the more it weakens the position of Russia in the post-Soviet space in the world as a whole, which we hope to talk about in the days to come. Tonight, Ukrainian drone pilots visit Sochi. Explosions were filmed even from the neighboring and recognized Abkhazia. Under the blow, there was an oil-based Luke South oil products. No concrete damage has been reported yet, so we are waiting for satellite images. Moreover, clear weather is promised in Sochi today and tomorrow. The day before in Rostov-Novicherkassk, drones attacked the building of Rostov. As it turned out in Astria, the office building on Baklanovsky Avenue 25, as well as a stop nearby, was heavily damaged from damage. Local residents complained about problems with the internet. In television from Rostov, on the night of July 23, Novicherkassk was attacked by massive BPA attacks. The Rostov region was attacked, according to the Russian authorities, and 3 people were injured. 4 km from the Rostov building, there is a 31st Aviation Technical Equipment Plant, which, according to the license, is engaged in the development, repair, and production of weapons and military equipment. In addition, according to the Ukrainian channel Ukagora, the Russian BPA in Novicherkassk was also attacked by an electric power plant and a railway station. There is no exact information about the damage, but it is obvious that Ukraine continues to work. On this project, the Ukrainian ASIN project, Cyberbureaus, gives an important context of the recent Ukrainian strikes on the Russian railway infrastructure. Turns out that such strikes not only create transport collapse for those who want to rest in the occupied Crimea, but also hurt the Russian military logistics. That's what the analysts write, screenshots and information about the defeat. The enemy logistics in the Rostov region began to appear on the network, namely the Novicherkassk station, Kamianske, and the Lykke-Zamchalovo connection. If everything is clear with the first 2, there were shots, everything is super, then the last one somehow passed by the information field, but this is a key element. The Lykke-Zamchalovo station has remained the most important logistic hub since the time of the ATO. And of course, it has not ceased to play this role during the full-scale invasion. In the first image, on December 12, 1922, the Russians transfer the BMD-4 to Ukraine. In the second image, you can see in which directions logistics can enter through the Lykke station, namely from the north of the CVO, plus through the Cherk-Komarovo station, the old Ilyinsk station from the northeast of the CVO-PVO, Morzhskaya station, through the Vasilevsky-Novonikliv station. From the east of the CVO, Kuberly-Salsk-Zernovo station, from the south, from the port of Idyla Rostov-Zverov-Lykke. On the third image, the importance of this node is shown for the front. In fact, a significant part of the conditional Donetsk and Lugansk directions is provided from here. On the fourth image, the Zamchalovo substation and the high activity of various equipment on its territory are impressive. It is clear that Russia is trying to restore this object as quickly as possible. To ensure continuous operation, as the substation was hit in the area of the lower branch, going from Lykke just on the side of Zamchalov, Yukovo, Dolzhensk. This complicates the enemy's logistics at the most difficult part of the front for us. They make a conclusion to Cyberbureau. So let's hope that the blows on the Russian railways will continue and will really ease the situation for Ukraine on the front. In Odesa, after the massive attack of the RF on the night of July 24, a 9-story residential building and a delivery market were destroyed. 1 person was injured, the GSC of Ukraine reports. The apartment was destroyed, people were injured, fires. Odesa had another hellish night. Russia was massively attacking the city by strike drones. A 9-story residential building was destroyed. People who lived in apartments from the 5th floor to the 8th floor were left without housing. The apartments on the 5th and 6th floors of one of the entrances were burning. There is a threat of collapse of the constructions. The rescuers evacuated 33 residents, saved 5 and blocked them in the apartments. Also, the rescuers work at other addresses where fires occurred. In a private building of the AZS, 3 people were previously injured, it is said in the report. Destructions were observed in the historical center of Odesa. Mayor Gennady Truyanov published footage of the consequences of the Russian attack. This is how the Primorsky Boulevard looks like to the world, he wrote. I'll just remind you that the Zetniks, some of Pushkin's and Dostoevsky's fans in the West, consider Odessa a part of Russian cultural heritage. But for Putin and his army, there is neither Pushkin, nor Dostoevsky, nor Babel, nor Ilf, nor Petrov. Their only heritage is death and destruction. Russians continue to terrorize the civilians of Kherson and the region, killing and crippling children and old people. As a result of the shelling of Kherson on July 23, a 60-year-old woman died. The head of the local police, Alexander Prokudin, reported the body of Zorovka, 2 children, were injured after the attack of the BPA. A civilian car was attacked by a drone in the morning. 2 men died on the road between Nizlem and Rameshkovo in Kherson region. 2 more people were injured, the regional prosecutor's office reported. Pokrovsk direction remains the most active on the entire front of the Russian-Ukrainian war. There is no promotion of the captured deep states. It does not mean that the Russians do not carry out constant attacks, which do not lead to changes in the front line only thanks to the heroism of Ukrainian fighters. On the other hand, Stanislav Bunyatov characterizes the situation in this direction. In the Pokrovsk direction, the enemy is actively trying to penetrate between our positions. At night, on foot, during the day, using motorcycles, such actions are aimed at destabilizing the line of combat contact. At the sites where effective BPL units work, the enemy in most cases does not reach even their positions. It is identified and eliminated at a distance of 1 to 5 km. Pokrovsk itself penetrates enemy saboteurs groups. The consequences are extremely negative, he writes. Actually, I told you about the breakthrough of Russian dergs in Pokrovsk in the days. Now I will just remind you that as a result, there are dead and wounded among the Ukrainian defenders of the city. Deep State records the progress of the Russians in the Nacke area to the west of Toretsk. Here, the Russian forces are suppressing the area of the defense of the 12th Brigade of the Azov National Guard in Cherbonovka and the surrounding areas. Also, Russian armed forces have advanced to the Delivka area to the northeast of the city, where the Russians are trying to get to Konstantinovka by another route. Ukrainian defense under Toretsk suffered a heavy loss. The commander of the Brigade of the National Police, Lyman Maxim Kazbin, died in an accident. In general, the Ukrainian military, which I read belongs to the police, let's say, like almost all the residents of the post-Soviet space. But for the fighters of Luda and her team, they make an exception. For example, this is what the unofficial channel Voice of Odesa writes, a big blow to the defense of Toretsk. On July 22, a commander of the United Assault Brigade Lyat of the Department of Police, specially assigned to the NPU, Colonel Maxim Kazbin, died in Kramatorsk on July 22. The HBR Lyat defends the ruins of Toretsk. At the very outskirts of the city, it is she, in pairs with other brigades of the National Police of Ukraine, Skelia, Volia, and Hizhak, defend the honest name of the policemen who are often accused of not fighting. Colonel Kazbin was an incredibly worthy man. The guys from the Lyad Brigade will not be allowed to lie that during the defense of Toretsk, he did a lot to ensure a high-quality evacuation of the fighters in a dense city building. The very fact of the beginning of the battle for Toretsk is already a failure of the defense force, which was approved in the summer of 1924 by the efforts of the Commander-in-Chief of the Operational Strategic Group of the Army of Kortsi, Lieutenant General Sadal, and the Commander-in-Chief of the Operational Tactical Group. The Lugansk Lieutenant Colonel Litovov. The names Ik and Kirovka with the replacement of MBR-24 to MBR-41 led to the fact that all available reserves had to be transferred to Toretsk. The NPO Lyat Brigade was the embodiment of the battles for Toretsk. In fact, it was unappreciable in connection with this battle and the role of Colonel Kobzana. Unlike the 100th MBR, it did not try to carry out large-scale, thoughtless counterattacks, but acted carefully and decisively, which led to the fact that some parts of the enemy from the 51st Regiment were literally destroyed and sent for restoration. The Battle of Toretsk was called Toretsk Meat Grinder. Even a year after the beginning of the battles in the city, the enemy cannot establish full control over them. This was made a huge contribution by the soldiers of the National Police and personally Colonel Maxim Kazbin, which is included in the Ukrainian channel. It remains only to express condolences to the relatives of Maxim Kazbin and all Ukrainian policemen who gave their lives in defense of Toretsk, and to hope that the brigade will receive a new, no less competent commander. Never die, eternal glory, as the voice of my post. Ukrainian military observer Konstantin Mashevitz talks about the situation in the South Donetsk in his terminology in the Novopavlovsk direction. According to his analysis, the Russian group of troops Vostok is deployed here. As part of the 4 general military armies of the same Army Corps, as well as additional units of the Eastern Military District, in particular, the 14th Separate Brigade of Special Purpose and the 336th Separate Brigade of the Navy. It is most likely that the number of the group is 95,000 people of the personal composition. 225 240 tanks, 626 50 armored vehicles, a few hundreds of artillery weapons of the Russian Armed Forces. On the evening of July 22-25, the Russian troops occupied 16 square kilometers of the village of Zelyny Gai for a day. Moving 5.5 kilometers to Alexandergrad, starting the fights for the eastern part of Vovchansk, catching up on Timirovka. At the same time, the Ukrainian defense forces keep their presence in the northern part of Malinovka in the Zaporizhzhia region. Investigators believe that Russian troops are trying to take control of the area at the junction of Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, and Zaporizhzhia regions, which will create a favorable position for the continuation of the offensive in any of these 3 regions. Deep State, in turn, notes the progress of the Russian armed forces in the area of Alexandrograd, Kamara, and Voskresenka. It is worth adding that the Russian armed forces are trying to violate Ukrainian logistics in this direction. The Chernovoyn DV, a close group of troops Vostok, shows a blow to the bridge across the Volcha River, along which the route of supply from the Dnipropetrovsk region passes. Deep State notes the progress of the Russians in the Lymansky direction in the region of Karpovka on the west bank of the river Zherbets and in the area of Toretsk Siverskyi in the Vostok. The Toretsk project itself turned into the gray zone, which is obviously due to the video movement of Russian military men on it, who, let me remind you, by the way, shot a local resident on a bicycle. The pro-Russian military blogger and cartographer Anatoly Radov, in connection with this, laughs at the colleagues who started to paint Toretsk on May 15 when the Ministry of Defense took him, as later it turned out, as a loan. This is how the situation in the Toretsk raid itself is characterized. In Toretsk in this series, our Ukrainians regularly hang out in different basements, and also regularly, and they go to the center for some reason. I note that such a situation, which some observers characterize as a layer on a pie, is currently being celebrated with a plushy row, which was recently written in deep state, explaining why there are such large gray zones on their map. Therefore, it is necessary to understand that all the markings on the maps are extremely conditional. The gray zone usually means not that there is no one there, but that it is possible to meet the fighters of both sides hiding in the basements from enemy drones. Ukrainian military author of the Telegram channel Officer tells about the attempt of Russian armed forces to make a crossing through the North Donetsk region of Vovchansk, which ended quite predictably, as most of the Russian crossings in this region. In the Vovchansk direction, the Russians begin to seriously activate and act impudently, writes the officer. In particular today, that is, on July 23, they tried to make a pontoon crossing through the North Donetsk. By Kherson, the operation was planned and prepared in advance under cover and smoke. At first, they tried to force the river on motorcycles, but in the end the pontoon was broken, and the beep orcs now ride the motorcycles in a mess. Though the attempt is unsuccessful, but this is a serious call for all directions, the Ukrainian military notes. The Russians continue to attack everywhere they can, and again, they experience problems everywhere. For example, this is what is written in the Don't Stop War magazine about the situation in the Zaporizhzhia region. Heavy fighting is taking place in Kamianske region. It is difficult for us to settle in this area. Elves throw our guys into all the arsenals they have. Let me remind you, not so long ago, the Russians almost completely captured Kamianske, which is located on the banks of the Dnipro before the explosion of the Damba, but it seems that it became more difficult to go further. By the way, the quoted post is already deleted. Why would it be interesting? Zepfocus collector Ivan Filipov found another post about how the Russian offensive looks from the point of view of his direct participants. The fighting author of the channel, Gavorit Rukvasva, wrote a sad long text about the situation at the front. Initially, the channel had several authors. One of them, just a few days after the publication of the same post, died in the assault, Filipov recalls. Slowly but steadily, Zenik says, we are moving through fields and landings, writes the Russian military. Ukrainians are standing to the end and are not going to give up. It is very difficult to work on the flanks because of the German artillery, FPV. It works point and tightly, but we can't move the bodies of people. In some places it is fixed, but moving due to the density of the stones, the drone in kamikaze does not work and the guys have to sit silently in the holes. Thank God that there's the only Mavic for throwing water and food. Brothers, I'm not kidding, he writes that the task on the direction is performed at any cost. Believe me, it's harder now than in the 23-24 years. The front has become wider. The useless ones who sit in the rear wander to the local prostitutes, are drunk in saliva. But because of people like them, you don't think that we are completely in the fairy tale and there is nothing here. From everything that is happening, it seems to me that mobilization will be soon. I am not a viewer. I do not know how one can get used to and relate to the happening beep, as in everyday life. I will not be allowed to lie that Donetsk, the very second admin of the channel, has climbed into such a hole on its site from which it still cannot be pulled out because it is physically impossible. The Ukrainians have a new frequency, they fly like at home. I do not say for myself, we do not have a rap at all, but for the neighbors who are equipped. If they try to get you, complain and ask for help, please believe me, there is a beep, a waste of money behind each promotion. You just can't cope without you. I tell you this not to cry, but because I want you to know that it is not as sweet as they write in the polls, and our technology in Ukrainian is on fire and destroyed. There is more than TV shows here, only there are special people who can acquire other people's trophies and merits. I even put up with it because I do not believe in any of those who give me commands. My task is to win faster and end this war because there is nothing cool in killing people. But if we do not bring everything to an end, we will come back here in a few years again, and I do not want to. I want to live and fulfill my dream and buy myself a house or an apartment, do what I like and live my own pleasure. I seem to have one. You forgive me for a minute of my weakness. I just want you to know that without your warm words of support, without your material help, we would have disappeared a long time ago. I am not looking for you or hiding from you. I am giving you the word that I am grateful to you as a family for myself, people. Thank you very much that you are there. And you are next to me once again. Sorry for this long, snotty story. We are going forward. Victory will be ours. For some reason, the author of the channel is still sure, absolutely sure, he will die, of course. No dreams will be fulfilled, because to fight under such commanders, to fight for something incomprehensible, to fight in the fascist occupation army. This is not the way that leads to the fulfillment of your own dream. Z channels continue to complain about the situation in the Russian unmanned industry. Another cry of the soul was shared by the channel Mind Division. I will warn you right away, there are some terms that are incomprehensible to the specialists, but the text does not become less beautiful from this. So this is what the Z channels tell, some notes from the last days. The first, a group of BPLH men, a unit of which only one flew on Mavikov at the front. The second and last, who knows how to ride a civilian, rode on sports FPV. All the others I will not call the decommissioned number so as not to discredit are 0. At the same time, this connection is not a fly, and taking into account its status, it should be among the top. Second, so touched on some prices on the purchases of Monkey Miniborona RF. For example, those good 8s, apparently we are talking about the octocopter, which I bought yesterday, fly out of the box and are actively used on the front, but are categorically not purchased by the MO-RF. The price tag is 3 times less than some of the specific 8s from the massively purchased MO-RF, which are still categorically not enough on the front. Moreover, the purchased MO-NKs have to be redone, including another connection. Third, a question arises from point 2. What Gondras do rats in the MO-NKs work on, which still makes mass purchases of birds on the ELRS, one of the drone control systems? Fourth, now a number of excellent operators and BPA officers are trying to get out of the assaults, using a lot of combat experience, including in very difficult circumstances. How did they get there? A Moscow general arrived with a check. As a result, the highest order was to bring everything to the standard schedule. As a result, only the commander of the assault platoon was found in the place of the well-prepared BPA officer. Let me remind you that most of the Russian units are still not allowed to use a drone. Fifth, the video of Gudvina itself was recently recorded by another well-known person. After everything that was developed for effective control, including the application of BPA in their bodies, ended up in the infantry. Sixth, well, I repeat, there are no technical problems with fighting with FPV for Filatov. There is only drudgery, stubbornness of some generals, especially a collection of armored personnel carriers. This is GOMU, the main organizational and mobilization department of the Ministry of Defense, the head of which, Medinsky, has long earned a medal for the Mazba and Ostanovko in the grave. Moreover, with what I saw recently, the question may and should be posed not only in the part of mopping up the BPA, but their operator. If it were not for the general, the Zetnik would end. I think even the Magyar would be tired of racking the Russian unmanned industry in Avdiv and Kamianske. The Russian Magyars, I remind you, drive the storm to one end, and thank God. The network got a video on which a fighter with a call sign Ruble smokes marijuana right in the dugout. The listeners who shoot the video claim that the fighters are stormtroopers, which means that no one will be able to punish them for the use of drugs, as the service in such a unit is already a punishment. The video brings good news to the channel, but I, for obvious reasons, cannot show it to you here because YouTube is not like that. In general, you can treat drug use differently, but while the Russian military smokes marijuana, they do not kill Ukrainians, and if they are on such a relaxation they will be stormtroopers or under fire, it may end in a bad way for them. So I can only encourage such a time of supervision, including when drug networks inside Russian units arrest people instead of those who distribute drugs. It's super cool to continue in the same spirit. Yesterday, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation published a very interesting message of the following content. On July 22, in accordance with the reached June 2 in the Istanbul Russian-Ukrainian agreements about urgent sanitary exchanges with the controlled Kiev regime of the territory, 2 Russian servicemen in urgent medical care are returned to the territory. At the moment, Russian servicemen are in the territory of the Republic of Belarus, where they need medical care, after which they will be delivered to the Russian Federation for treatment in medical institutions. Let me remind you that during the previous meeting in Istanbul, in addition to other things, it was agreed that the return of seriously wounded prisoners of war would take place regularly outside the framework of major exchanges. For example, international law, in particular, the Geneva Convention on the Treatment of Prisoners of War. We will hope that the Russians will also comply with the Istanbul agreements, returning home seriously wounded and seriously ill Ukrainians. Unfortunately, I hope this is not really much, because we know that the Russians actively torture Ukrainian military in the Russian captivity, and 95% of Ukrainian soldiers and civilians who are captured by Russia are tortured. Often these are tortures to death, a terrible situation. And I hope that everyone, from the commander to the cleaner and all these torturous casemates, of course, will meet their salary. Category D, not a reason to be fired. In the DPR, a man was mobilized from schizophrenia. 2 years later, he was sent to Kamianske for sale, and his wife's apartment was raided by the unknown, and she was shot on the balcony. He also told about the Astor building, which he wants to thank separately for not leaving the topic of the Donbass mobilized, showing that in the future he can wait for the inhabitants of other occupied territories of Ukraine. In addition, this mobilization itself is a military crime. International law directly forbids the mobilization of the inhabitants of the occupied territories. The inhabitants of Donetsk, Dmitry Orkov, were mobilized on February 21, 1922. He served in the 5th Brigade, Unit 41698. According to the lawyer, during the treatment, the man was transferred to Unit 34487. On March 7, 1924, Orkov went on a combat mission with his group and disappeared from contact, says Astria, Yekaterina's husband. Orkov again contacted his wife on April 9. She complained that his husband was very aggressive and behaved inappropriately, communicating with his dead coworkers. On April 10, 1924, the man was admitted to the city's psychiatric hospital 3 Donetsk. Katerina noted that her husband behaved inappropriately and before mobilization, but the war destroyed his condition. In addition, the man has a problem with vision. Since birth, he stings. Despite this, he was declared in March 24 in Sochi. Self-reliance is a part of what Yekaterina found out from her husband's military unit. He brought documents from the hospital about her husband's diagnosis, but the investigator of the 121st Military Investigation Department of Donetsk, Artem Shuvalov, said that the category D is not the basis for dismissing all the documents of Yekaterina about her husband's diagnosis. Since April of 1924, an unknown man comes to the apartment of Orkov several times a month with questions about where his husband is, similar to how he comes to the house of the hero announced in Sochi, the material of Astra, Alexander Bartlett. The unknown people were caught on the footage of external surveillance. He came constantly saying that he was in Sochi, although all the documents were given in part. There were different people, they presented themselves in different ways, they were looking for him. It was such that they went into the apartment, examined it, and asked, "If we go to the hospital, will he be there?" My answer is go. It's April 24 to this day, I do not remember how many times they came. I made notes when someone came, says Ekaterina. On April 11, 1924, when a woman entered the apartment with a child, at that moment she heard a clap and found out that an unknown was shot into a satellite dish hanging on the balcony of the apartment. On December 30, 1924, Orkova was sent from Rostov to St. Petersburg on a military board together with other military personnel on the passage of the military medical commission. There, he was confirmed to be in the D category, unfit for military service, diagnosed with prenatal schizophrenia. On July 22, he was fired from the military academy of Kiev and bought a ticket to Rostov, but right from the train to Rostov at the Moscow station, Orkova was detained by the military commandant. As the man's lawyer says, now he's being sent to Kamianske to be bought by buyers. This is not that it is illegal, it is inhumane to mobilize such military personnel, and unfortunately, this is not a single case. Here the issue is more about the military unit. How can we treat the military personnel's fate so carelessly? My client's wife repeatedly approached the military unit, providing documents, but there they pretended that they did not know her. There were constant reproaches that he gets a full salary, although the man did not go there on his own will, and because the head of the Donetsk People's Republic in his time, it was considered that the army was formed in the Donetsk People's Republic, and therefore they took everyone who could only get into the military commandant's eyes, the lawyer told. Stroh published an investigation into the torture of Russian military commanders of the 5th and 110th Brigades. According to the editors of the editorial, the commanders set up a real concentration camp on the territory of the abandoned Petrovsky mine in Donetsk. It was there, before the death of the military from the 5th Brigade, that the American military corps Russell Bentley was tortured. There the men tried to refuse to fight and then forced to go on a deadly assault. Donetsk, formerly repeatedly convicted Russian serviceman, broke into a pensioner's apartment and tried to beat her. As Astro found out, the incident occurred in the evening of July 17. The unknown broke into the apartment of the residents of the house on Grekovo Street, occupied by Russia and Donetsk. He attacked the pensioner, beat her, and tried to beat her. Later, the man was arrested and turned out to be a military officer of the 344-79 unit, wanted by the military for the self-defense of the unit, 59-year-old Azad Sufinov. According to a report published by Bazdan, which published by Astra, Sufinov lived before the war in Bashkiria. Earlier, the Russian military was repeatedly judged, including for theft, hooliganism, violation of the integrity of housing, and beep. Another hero, his 52-year-old resident of Magnitogorsk, accused of beep, violent acts of beep character, robbery, and attempted murder, ran away from court and went to war with Ukraine, reported the Telegram channel Chelyabinsk of the Future. He was threatened with up to 20 years in prison. The beep committed a crime from June 16 to January 2018 in the Erzhenikidzevsky district of Magnitogorsk. He watched women at the doors of their apartments, tied them, threatened them with a knife, raped and robbed, stealing money and jewelry. The criminal wore a balaclava so that he would not be recognized. The Ministry of Internal Affairs stated that the suspect was arrested only on December 24. This was possible due to genetical expertise. Biological traces were collected at the crime scene. According to Chelyabinsk Budashev, investigators needed to take more than 3,000 people to the NK. According to the Mezh, the criminal's name is Alexander Yegorov. He is a businessman. The motive was to own money, and because of the divorce with his wife, there was hatred for the female beep. Therefore, he committed beep acts, said Yegorov at the interrogation. At the time of his arrest, he was known as the 7 victims of the criminal. The case of Alexander Yegorov was handed over to the court on July 1, 1925. But already on the 3rd, the Orzhenikids District Court of Magnitogorsk approved the release of the head of the Selected Center for Military Service, cancelled the arrest, and suspended the case. Yegorov went to war with Ukraine, and perhaps, if he manages to survive there, he will return to freedom, to citizenship, and will continue to do what he was doing. And there are already thousands of such examples, if not tens of thousands, because Russia imposes any claim to war. and gives this claim a chance after this war to return to being a citizen, along with the skills of killing. The lack of final morality because these are fascist occupation troops, and the lack of any corrective work which should be carried out in the places of imprisonment, although in Russia, of course, this is a big question, but nevertheless. Which Russia of the future, Chelyabinsk of the future in particular, forms the current regime of Vladimir Putin? Well, Michael Nacke was with you, and see you soon. All the best. Bye.